Shmeichel. All right, with Hashem's help, we're learning today Yevamos Daf Nun Beis. We left off yesterday Nun Aleph Amid Beis, all the way in bottom, when the Mishnah, after quoting the machlekes between Rabbi Gamliel and the Chachamim, Ein get, Acher get, Ein maimer, Acher maimer, versus Yesh get or Yesh maimer, Acher maimer, or Acher get. Then the Mishnah gave another scenario where get to one, maimer to the other, or vice versa. And then the Mishnah began to explain the latter cases. Quotes the Gemara, Keitzar Aser maimer chuli, Daf Nun Beis. Asks the Gemara, Ha get, Acher getu. The example that the Mishnah is giving is an example of get la Acher get. It's not. The Mishnah did not talk out the first case of the machlokes. And the Gemara says, correct, true. Amar Rav Yehuda hachi ka'amar. Geit achar get umachar achar maimer. If you want to know, if you want to talk out the case of the first machlokes in the Mishnah, is you know where it's talked out, kidda amar, and it's as we had it in the Braisa. The Mishnah does not explain it. The Mishnah only begins explaining the case where there was one Yavam and there was one Yevama, and Keitzar hatarasam, what were to happen if with the same Yevama he did two different things, which was he gave a maimer, which is the ideal. Giving a maimer is the first step of Yibum, and then in the first case, the first group of cases in the Mishnah, he gave her a maimer, and then he gave that same one a get. So the Mishnah began explaining that she needs to get chalitza. In other words, the get does not allow them to get married. Marriage, Yibum, is no longer an option. Chalitza is needed. The get does not do what a chalitza does. Chalitza is needed. However, the Mishnah said at the end that if he gave her first maimer, and then uba'al, and then he had a relation with this Yevama, harezu kimitzvasa, this is the way the mitzvah should be. Now, don't forget that mid'oiraisa, you know how the mitzvah should be? Mid'oiraisa, there's no maimer. Mid'oiraisa, you go straight to bia. So the Gemara says, Leima mesa'el l'Rafuna. Apparently, this is a backup, a proof to that which Rav Huna said. What did Rav Huna say? The Amar Rav Huna, that mitzvahs yivama, that the way to do the mitzvah of yibum is you have to do kiddushin, and then you have a relation with her. And maybe that's what the Mishnah means to say, harezu kemitzvasa, that even though mid'oiraisa, there's no maimer. But now that the Chachamim instituted maimer, it needs to be done that way. Now, of course, even according to Rav Huna, if it was not done that way, if the Yavam had bia with the Yavama, it's effective. But the Mishnah is trying to tell you, don't do it that way. So the Gemara says, you can't prove from the wording of the Mishnah that Rav Huna is right, because perhaps the Mishnah meant, af zeh kimitzvasa, this too is correct. So the Gemara says, no, that cannot be the meaning of the mitzvah, of the Mishnah, because if that would be the meaning, it's pshita. Of course, this too is an option, maimer and yibum. So the Gemara says no. Salkadaita chamina, kiven do amar mar, one might have thought, since we learned that ha'oisa maimer biyavimtai, that if a person does maimer with his yavama, parcha heimenus zikas yavamin, it completely dissolves the original zika. And now v'chala all of zikas eros and v'nesuyin. Perhaps when you do maimer really, being that maimer is so effective, maimer changes her status of being a Yevama, and it puts her into the status of her being an engaged wife, in which when the man marries his engaged wife, what is he doing there? He's doing the mitzvah of marriage. But perhaps you can't even say here there's the mitzvah of Yibum. Ein malav mitzvah ka'avid. Komash malan, that no, that you still have that even when you did maimer, which is what you're supposed to do, when you finalize it with Yibum, with an act of bia, that is not considered a marriage, it's considered the mitzvah of Yibum.
Can you clarify this whole, what is Rav Huna coming in and saying? Is in Amora, the concept of maimer was, he's talking by the Chachamim, that this is what you do when you...
Correct. Rav Huna is saying it needs to be done that way. It needs to be done that way, and our Mishnah's wording does not prove him to be right. There's a big difference between you being suggested to do something versus a rabbinic law that you have to do it that way. Now the mitzvah is dafka through maimer. And Rav Huna says now you have to do maimer first. If not, you violated the rabbinic law. Let's go back. Gufa, we learned Amar Rav Huna. Rav Huna says mitzvahs yivamim, that the mitzvah of yibum now is first mekadosh. You have to first give kedushin, and only then v'achar kach boil. However, ve'imbal v'asar maimer. But if he had an act of cohibition first, and then he did mimer. So even though that he did not follow the rabbinic laws, kana. Imagine, in other words, he has to speak this out, the way Tosfos explains, that one might have thought that now that there is a rabbinic law of doing mimer, perhaps until you did mimer, rabbinically she's considered your brother's wife, and you would be prohibited to have a relation with her. And the Gemara says, "Im bal va'asa mimer pshita." Why did Rav Huna even have to say that? I mean, we would think that the rabbis, so to say, erased the mitzvah of Yibum. Of course, if he had a relation with her, it's effective. Ella Eimer say what he's saying in Baal, B'loi Maimer, what he meant to say was that if a person had a relation and he did not do Maimer, Rav Huna wants to tell you, even though he did not do the mitzvah the right way, nevertheless, kana. We learned that if a man does bia with his Yevami, he gets flogged. So the Gemara says he gets flogged by rabbinic floggings. Makas mardus midrabanan. There's makas midairaisa, there's makas mardus. There's mardus means you give makas to someone who rebelled against the sages. There are many differences between them, and there's many arguments in the Rishonim exactly what the difference will be. First of all, the instrument of rabbinic makas is a stick. The instrument of Torah makas is a whip. When a person gets Torah makas, he gets 39 lashes, unless the court felt, they get a doctor, and the doctor says that he will not survive beyond 20, then you only gave 20. But theoretically, you give 39. By rabbinic makas, there's a whole machlekes in Rishonim. Many people say that rabbinic makas to begin with is much less. Many Rishonim hold it's 13. Many Rishonim say the opposite, that by rabbinic makas you hit a lot more. Especially there's certain laws that the Chachamim said, don't do A for you not to violate B. If you're going to do this, you might end up breaking a Torah law. In those cases, many Rishonim hold that if a person is violating that rabbinic law, so we are afraid that he might end up violating a Torah law, you flog him until he stops doing what he's doing. Unbelievable. In any event, this is only rabbinic makas, and the Gemara is going to prove that flogging a yavam who did not do maimer, that flogging is of rabbinic nature. Where do we know it from? So now we're going to speak about the statement that we will learn, God willing, later in Kedushin, regarding Rav. Rav, apparently, he gave a lot of makas mardus for various violations. So the Rav Mangid, let's use the word disciplined. Rav disciplined the following people. Man de mekadosh bebia, if a person is initiating a engagement through an act of cohibition by Torah law, as the Mishnah says, ho'isha niknis b'shloisha derachim, b'kesef, b'shtar, u'bebia. That means that we can initiate a halachic engagement either the way we do it today through money, or something that has monetary value, or through giving a document, even if the document in itself is valueless, it's mamash an ashmata, but the words written there, the witnesses there affect the engagement, or through having a relation. Rav says if a man engages his kala with bia, he gets flogged. The other one who he flogged was uman de mekadesh b'shuka. If a man is going to give kedushin to his kala in the public market. Now we're not saying that you cannot do a chuppah. I'm sorry, we do the kedushin in a chuppah. Where do people have chuppahs? Many people have chuppahs in the marketplace. Fakert, we, the Ashkenazim, we have the chuppah by the first marriage under the stars, outside. But that's not called shukah. Shukah means that a man is going to go to a place that wasn't designated now for a wedding. And he's going to go and call two witnesses in the middle of the busyness of the marketplace and get engaged to her. He found that not modest, or he's being mezalzel, he's desecrating, he's de-evaluating the holiness of Kedushin. Another one, if a person gets engaged with a woman without prior arrangement, that's what shidducha means. Prior arrangement, if someone is watching this, got engaged to his wife without having a shatchen, that's not what we're referring to over here. Prior arrangement will also mean that a man is not even, he meets a woman, they never spoke about marriage yet, and all of a sudden they're all burning up, and he right away gives her kedushin. That's not good. You have to get ready for it. You have to speak about it first, and then do the act of kedushin. Uman de mevatel gitei, he gave makas to someone who nullified his get. What does that mean? When a man writes a get, a man can give a get directly, miyadoi liyada, which is the way it's done in most cases today. He drops the get directly over her hands, into her hands. However, a person can send the get to his wife through a shliach. Now, if a person gives the get to the shliach, he has the power to nullify the get by making a declaration that this get is no longer valid, or I'm nullifying the power that I gave you as my proxy. You're not my shliach. He can do that in front of the shliach. In front of the shliach. The shliach needs to know that this get is no longer effective. Because if he would make that declaration once the shliach left, then the get is nullified, but the wife won't know that. She'll get the get and marry another man. So the Rav says that even if a person is nullifying his get in front of a shliach, I'm going to flog you. Because it might lead to someone nullifying his get once it's already out of their knowledge, out of his power of retraction, and the get that will be given is no longer a good get. Another person, Uman de Masar Maida Agita. You have a very interesting halach. If and when, but only when, a Beis Din paskins that a man has to give a get to his wife, then if the man was forced, coerced, to write a get to his wife, that get is considered a valid get. Even though it says a man has to divorce his wife willingly. So we have the famous Rambam who says that the willingness of every Jew is to do what Hashem wants. He's not conscious of it, he thinks he doesn't want. That's the Yetzer Hara's consciousness. And when you beat a person, you reveal his real and I want to do what God wants. This is when the Beis Din is paskening that a man has to divorce his wife. Now, when Beis Din doesn't give up psak din, this is sadly some things that happens today, and a man is being coerced, let's say by the secular courts, to give a get to his wife. The man calls over 2 people or 3 people and he declares, I'm making a notification, that I am giving the get under duress and the get is not valid. That declaration is of significance and the get is not valid. When a man is being forced by a Beis Din to give a get, he can make this declaration from today until the moon. That declaration doesn't mean anything. Because since the Beis Din paskent, he has to give a get. Yes, we know you are under duress, but you really want to give it. So Rav went ahead and said that when a man who was given a get because Beis Din said he needs to, if he puts together people and he declares, I am giving it under coercion, even though we all know that that declaration is of no significance, that the get is valid, but other people won't know that nuance. They won't know that there's a difference between one giving a get because Beis Din paskin so, versus a person giving a get because without the psak din of a Beis Din. And people not knowing that will think the get is not good, when really the get is good. And people are going to be moitzilaz that this woman is not really divorced. And if she gets married to another man, people are going to spread rumors that the children are mamzerim. So Rav says, whoever makes such a declaration when he was not allowed to, will get flogged. Next one, Uman, the Pakir, Shlicha de Rabbanan, anyone who disrespects a Shlich of a Beis Din. The Shlich of a Beis Din has a certain power. First of all, we gave him a certain level of trustworthiness, of neimanus. Imagine, the Shlich Beis Din comes and he says that I told someone, subpoenaed someone to come to court, and they said they're not coming. He doesn't have to bring 2 witnesses to say that they denied Beis Din. We believe a Shliach Beis Din. So there's a certain chashivus we give to a Shliach Beis Din, and anyone who disrespects him gets flogged. Next one is Uman Deshohi Shamta Rabbanan Alei Tilsin Yomin. If someone allows for a ban handed out by a court on him, he allows that time to pass, and he doesn't go to the Beis Din to overturn that. Right? What tools does a Beis Din have? Today and forever. That if a person doesn't listen to the Beis Din, they don't have to have a jail system. They have the power to put the person in a ban. As we learned extensively in Moed Katan, the different types of bans and how it goes from one level to a worse level. Once a person is in a ban by a Beis Din, they have to get out of it. They have to resolve the issue. If the person is so lightheaded, is so disrespectful to a Beis Din, and it says, put me in a ban, I don't care, and 30 days pass and he doesn't try to resolve it, Rav used to flog him. And look at this one, Va'al Chasana. He used to flog a son-in-law, the Do'ir Be'chamohi, that lived in the house of his father-in-law. The Chachamim felt that there's a large possibility that some type of improper relations could develop between a mother-in-law and a son-in-law. So living in their house is asir.
He was wondering if it works the other way.
Yeah, yesterday we surmised that means they also can't stay with you. Based on this...
No, that's not the wording. First of all, we don't paskin that way. And second of all, just to make it, that's not the wording over here. I think there's a big difference how people feel. No. It's about a son-in-law not going into the mother-in-law's house.
Sure.
So now the Gemara says, yeah, the doid in the chalafloi. One thing is making it clear that living. The Gemara asks the doid in the chalafloi. It's only for living there, but passing through is not a problem. There was a person, the chalif, that he just walked by the door of his mother-in-law, and Rav Sheshes gave him malchus. So the Gemara says there, that there was already rumors. People knew that something not appropriate is going on over there. Okay. Now the Gemara says that Nahardoi, we paskin like the Nahardoins. It's amazing that it's not even a name. It was a city filled with Talmidei Chachamim, and the Nahardoins had opinions. So in Nahardoi they said, that you have the wrong tradition. Rav did not flog only on a person who did two things together wrong. What are the two? That both he got engaged to her with having an act of a relation, with Bia, and to make it worse, they never spoke about engagement before. So it almost looks like an act of znus. Ubaloi shiduchi. Other people say that it wasn't when both were together. Even with shiduchi, having kedushin through Bia was something that Rav frowned upon and rabbinically prohibited with the penalty of rabbinic floggings. Why? Mishum pritzusa, because it is an act of pritzus. How is it an act of pritzus? So there's two ways of understanding it. Either it's an act of pritzus because it's not sanua. You're not engaged to her, you're right away having a relation. Other people say, no. It's not about the man and the woman. For kedushin to go into effect, you need to have edim. And the edim there are not edei bitter, the edei kiyum. They are the ones that make that act be considered a halachic act. So exactly how do you have edim by bia? So however you're going to do it, even if they don't have to mamash be there during the act of bia, but they have to be witnesses that say that we know that they had bia, and that is something that is very modest. Okay, weiter. Tan Rabbanan. We learned in the Brayso the following: Ketzad, Maimer. What is Maimer? How do you do Maimer? Right? Your question, Ido. Nasan la kesef, Ishava kesef. That you give her money or something that has the value of money. And let's look inside the Rashi, which is very important. It's way up on the Amid. I would say it's a third up. Nasan la kesef, Ishava kesef. Va'amar la. And you tell her, Hiskachi li, become engaged to me, not Kadash Moise Yisrael. B'maimer Yevamin. These are the words that are said. In other words, it's the same act, but there's a declaration. Become engaged to me through a maimer that is given between a Yavam and a Yavama, probably Kadash Moise Yisrael. I'm just thinking about that out loud because Kadash Moishe means Torah law. And maimer is not Torah law. Just to know, Kadash Moishe V'Yisrael is by Torah law and by rabbinic law. And Rashi doesn't say how you say that. I'm curious to myself to know if that's the end, or even according to Rashi you added any words. Ubishtar Ketzad. Then the Brayso asks, and how do you give her a kedushin through a shtar? So the Gemara asks right away. We interrupt the Brayso. The Gemara says, Bishtar Ketzad. What kind of question is that? Now that you already said that kedushin is mamish like a normal kedushin, so we should know automatically that just like you can do kedushin through a shtar between a man and a woman that are not related in a normal engagement, so why would this be different? Keda Amaran, didn't you already told us that the money is like a normal kedushin, so we can on our own figure out that kasav lana nair, that you write on a piece of paper or on a broken shard. The reason why the Brayso here and in many places emphasize a broken piece of pottery is because if the document has its own value, then it also works because you gave her something of value. The greatness of kedushin through a document is that even if it doesn't have any value, it's a broken piece of chart, it will also affect kedushin because you write on it the same words: Hiskachi li b'maimer yevamin. Afal pi she'ein shavaprut. Hariyat nikudeshet li. That's the question. So Abaye says, no. Look in the Brayso. The Brayso was not speaking about what you thought. Amar Abaye hachi ka'amar. The question the Brayso was addressing was, what type of ksuba does a Yavam have to give to his Yevama? Remember, we learned about this a couple of pages ago. I know we talked about it by heart. Don't forget that ksuba either is midoraisa or ksuba is midrabanan. But a ksuba is a document which has in it two responsibilities generally. There is the documented responsibility that the man is assuming that during their marriage that he will fulfill the obligations a man has to his wife. She'er ksusan aina. What's more explicitly written there is monetary, that he's going to clothe her, he's going to feed her, he's going to have a roof over her head, etc. And there's another clause there, if he will divorce her, or if he will die before her, that there's a certain amount of money that she will get from his assets. Question is, what type of ksuba does a Yavam write to his Yavam? He's not choosing to marry her, so to say. The words of Chazal is that Isha asher hiknu loy min hashamayim. She's a woman that was basically given to him from the heavens. Because we keep on learning, at least originally, before people do things not purely l'shem shamayim, that it's ideal to do yibum. So he was commanded to marry her.
She probably already got something from her brother.
And one second, the question is, let's go better. Does she get anything from the brother? In other words, if he does chalitza, then she'll get something from the brother. If there's a mitzvah of yibum, whatever she gets as a widow, she will not get. Because she's not a full widow yet. Because she's already connected to the brother. And if the brother marries her, which is exactly the case, whatever the first brother promised her stays. And where will that money be taken from? From the first husband's estate. Because the one who does yibum also inherits everything that the first brother left. The assets of the first brother was lien to the ksuba. So all what happens is those assets with that lien is passed on to him. And that's what the Braisa is telling you. That shtar ksubas yivam and ketza, that Kosev Lo, he writes to her, Ano pleni bar pleni. I, the son, bar the father. Kabilis, I accepted upon myself, yas ploinis yivanti, Mr. So-and-so who's my yivama, upon me, lazun, to give her food, ulafarnasa, and to give her parnasa. So you see, right over here, just to know when we speak the word parnasa, parnasa is beyond food. Parnasa is more than food. Kiroi, the way one should. However, you wrote in the document, that if I will divorce her, or if I will die, the money she gets after the marriage goes from the estates of my deceased brother.
Can you just clarify?
Yes.
Does she get the whole estate, or she just gets the me'ezos, or whatever it is?
Whatever it is. No, I'll tell you even.
I mean, let's say the guy's a multi-millionaire.
But
he dies, the brother does yibum.
Him being a multimillionaire has nothing to do with yibum. If a man is a multimillionaire and dies,
Yes.
then she gets the ksuba money.
Wait, but first, the brother does yibum, all that millions goes to the brother.
Yep.
Now belongs to him.
Yep.
If he subsequently divorces her...
Danny, don't forget, let's say Reuven died, the millionaire, and let's say he would not have a living brother.
Right.
Or he would have kids. So those millions would also never go to her. It would go to his Yarshim, whether they are children or grandchildren. If he has no children nor grandchildren, then it goes up. And if the father is no longer living, then it goes to the father's sons, or to their sons. And if there's none of that, then it goes up. It goes down, up, and then to the sides. So yeah, it has nothing. She doesn't get hurt from it. The point here is that he, the new Yavam, doesn't give her a nuksuba. However, the Braisa adds, what happens if the first brother, the opposite the way you're thinking, he Nebuch was a schlepper. He had no money. That means that if there wouldn't have been the mitzvah of Yibum, money would have been owed to her, but she wouldn't have gotten it. He didn't leave any money. The Chachamim never allow a man to be married to a woman without the knowledge that if he divorces her, he'll have to pay some money for that. So here they made him, even though that he didn't choose to marry her, it's a woman, nevertheless, v'i leis leimerishain, tikinu larabanan misheni. Why? It should not be easy for a man to divorce his wife. Midairaisa, you do not need a woman's consent to get a get. Marriage has to be consensual from both sides. Divorce, midairaisa not. Rabbeinu Gershon, one of his 3 decrees that are called acherim, is that she also has to want. But before that, he can want, she doesn't have to want. So what's to prevent a man who all of a sudden wants to divorce his wife to just go and divorce her? So the Chachamim, to prevent that, made it harder on him by making it cost money. And that needs to be standing in the second marriage, even if he didn't choose to marry her because she is his Yevama. Now, a couple of questions. What happens if Nasan get? If a Yavam gives the Yevama a get, what did we learn the whole Pedic is based on the concept that Mida Ayraisa, a get does nothing. Mida Rabbanan, the get severs the relationship enough, you want to divorce her. The rule is that once a person severs the relationship with one's Yevama, there's a lav for him to ever marry her again. Kivan shaloi bana shuvlo yivna, you gave her a get, now you can't change your mind. Now you have to go and only do chalitza, but you have to give her chalitza. But what happens if he gave her a funny get? What was the get? That he wrote in the document of get, Harei at megoreshes haimenu, you're divorced from me, But you cannot marry whoever you want. The whole idea of a get is a document that severs the man and the woman. So if there's anything in the document that doesn't affect a full severance, that get certainly does not fully work. So if he gave her a get that wasn't fully kosher, maybe the get is nothing. To begin with, the get is only valid midrabanan by a case of yibum. And now he added the clause which should more or less disqualify the get. Maybe the get is mamish nothing, and maybe he still has the option to do yibum. Do we say get by a yevama is only the rabbananu? Only has a power to begin with midrabanan. Get the mahani be'eshes ish, so a get that would sever a normal wife, mahani biyavama. But a get to lemahani be'eshes ish, maybe lemahani biyavama, and it should have no effect whatsoever. Or idilma asi lachlufe bigita. People who are observing it will see that Shimon, the yavam, gave a get, and then he did yibum, and no one protested. No one knows that the get that he gave was to begin with a not good get. So people are going to think that you can do yibum after get. So maybe the Chachamim made a loy plug, you can never do yibum after a get. So he responded, Amalei Chayshinon, that we are afraid of that. Dilma asi lachlufe begito. Because people will confuse this case to a good get, yibum is not allowed. Ask the Gemara Maskav Rabba Barachanon, Elamayata, Havakash. What would happen if the yavam gives to the yavam a piece of paper? And the piece of paper is blank. And he tells her, Nayara Ba'alma, Hachinami de Pasla. And the way Rashi learns, he gives her a piece of paper. Obviously, he must tell her something. Because if there's nothing written on it, but he gives her a piece of paper and says, here's your get. Are you going to say that since the observer thinks there was a get, he can no longer do yibum? That's not the case. He could do yibum. So the Gemara says that there's a big difference between giving her a piece of paper that's worth nothing versus giving her a piece of paper that says you are divorced from me, but you cannot marry anyone else. What difference is there? Simple, halacha. If a kohen divorces his own wife, even though it's his wife, and she did not marry anyone else yet, he can no longer remarry her because she's a divorced woman. If a kohen gives a get to his wife and it says in it, you are divorced from me, but you can't marry anyone, the Chachamim do not allow this man to ever be with her. Because she got some type of divorce. It's called she got the smell of a get from him. Reyach haget. But if a kohen gives his wife a piece of paper that has nothing written on it, and he declares you're divorced, he could stay married to her. So we see that the piece of paper is less powerful than a wrongly written document. So therefore one is not connected to the other. Hasam over there, lepasel b'kohona. Hachi over here, kapasel b'kohona. The Tanya, like we learned in the Braisa, ve'isha gerusha me'isha lo yikachu. It says regarding a kohen that he cannot marry a woman that was divorced, but the Torah says that was divorced from a man. Divorced from a man is extra words. Of course, divorced from a man. So that's to teach you that even if she was only divorced from him, meaning that he wrote a get and he writes, you're divorced from me, but you can't marry anyone else. That's also considered enough of a divorce. He can no longer be with her. And that's called the reyach haget. And whenever there was a reyach haget, such a woman can never marry a kohen, unlike a piece of paper. So now we come to another case. Amar Rami Bar Chama says, Rami, Harei Amru. Get is not kosher, but it was kosher enough to already bring some type of disqualification between their marriage. In our case of a yavam and a yavama, it will no longer allow her to do yibum with her because he gave her a reyach haget.
But I'm saying, how does that impact the kohen?
Because his wife is a divorced woman.
It's not really a get, so the alternative would be there would be a full-fledged get.
No, the opposite. When he gives her a piece of paper and he tells her, you're divorced from me, and nothing was written on it, he can continue his marriage with her. They were never divorced, they're still married. If a man gave her a get, a kohen gave her a get, but you're not mutar l'chol adam, they're not divorced, but they cannot be together. He has to now give her a kosher get.
If he was Yisrael,
Then he can stay,
if he was Yisrael and he did this reyach haget and then he died, she would probably be usher to marry a kohen.
yes. If he died, because another example, very good. Let's go back to Omar Echad, we learned that if someone tells a lavla, a scribe, Kosuv get la arusasi, write a get. A guy gets engaged, he's not even married to her yet. He walks over to a scribe and he tells the scribe, write a get. Between engagement and marriage, Torah engagement, you have to give a get. But he's asking a scribe to give a get. I'm not going to give it to her now. I'm only going to give it to her after I marry her. When I will marry her, then I got sheno. Now, there's a whole other subject called writing a predated get. It's called the get yashin. And a get yashin should never be written. But if a get yashin was used, b'di'evet, it's a good get. Before you use it. He's writing it now, he's going to use it in 2 years from now. So, take out the get yashin issue. It's an issue, the Rishonim deal with it, let's say b'di'evet is good. Question is, you can only, a get has to be written for him, for her, and for the get. L'shem gerushin. If a get is written before there's a connection between a man and a woman, as the Braisa will talk out, so a man is not even married yet. I'm thinking of marrying her. The first thing he does is he goes over to a scribe, write the get. I want to have the get ready. And then he gets engaged, then married her and gives her the get won't be valid at all. Because it was written at a time that he cannot use it. So when he was engaged, then he wrote it, Harei ze get. If he'll end up using it, b'di'evet it's going to be good. B'pnei should be yodoi legarsha, because it was written at a time that he was able to divorce her turning the page. However, uli isha ba'alma, but if he writes it to a non-related woman, these are people who are really afraid to get married. If he's thinking of dating her, first he wants to get ready. So then, ain't get, because it was written at a time, she'ein b'yodoi legarsha. Okay, first of all, that's an undisputed statement. Now comes the question, now asked Rami Bar Chama, what happens, again, Reuven dies, he leaves his widow Rachel, there's one brother Shimon. If Shimon tells a scribe to write a get, and then he'll end up doing Yibum with her, can he use that get? Don't forget, Miday Raisa, a Yavam either should do Yibum with the Yevama, or Chalitza. A get, Miday Raisa, does not have significance. But we're saying midrabanan, and it does something. But no one is advocating for a get to be used. A get should not be used in the case of Yavam and Yavam.
To get out of that, at that point,
that's something else. The question is she considered the Isha Ba'alma? So, on one hand, do we say, Kivan the Agido Bay, since they are connected, is Ka'arusasai, they are considered as if they're engaged. And don't forget, we keep on learning in our Mishnah that midrabanan, the get has some type of power. So it's good enough. If he didn't even do Maimer, then loy, take him. This question stays standing. Next case. Boya Rab Chananya. Rab Chananya asks the question, Kosav get lizikosav iloy l'mamoray. What we are learning the whole time is that when a Yavam gives a get to his Yevama, what does the get do? The get severs or partially severs their zika. So the get did damage. The get does not allow them to get married, because when a man divorces, does chalitza with the Yevama, the Torah says, since you chose not to build your brother's house, you can never build it. So it severs the zika. What's going to happen if a man gives maimer to his Yevama? And after he gives maimer, he gives a get, but he says, I want this get only to sever what the maimer accomplished. The maimer accomplished some type of rabbinic marriage. I want the get only to sever the marriage. Or he said, I'm giving you a get. I want this get only to sever the Torah connection I had with you, but I do not want it to sever the maimer marriage. Will he maybe have to give her another get? As if he clarifies that I'm giving a get not to both sever the maimer and to sever the zika, he says it should only work either for the zika or for the maimer. Mahu. Do we say, look at this, maimer ilave zika korami. How does the maimer work? Don't forget, he did not tell her hariyat nikudeshetli. See, a maimer, normal kedushin begins, there's no relation. A kedushin begins a relation. He's not doing a kedushin. It begins by the fact that there's a zika. So there's a connection between the Yavam and the Yevama, and he's going ahead. According to Rav Huna, he has to go ahead and give her maimer, but the maimer strengthens the zika, so to say. But it's based on the zika. One is together with the other, and therefore you cannot sever one without the other. For example, the Gemara gives, imagine if a man tells his wife, I'm giving you a get, but I only want this get to affect half of our marriage. I'm divorcing half of you. And it has no effect. It does nothing. The get is of no consequence. So here also, if a man says that I want this get to only sever either the zika or only sever the maimer, maybe this get does nothing. You can't sever one without the other, because the maimer is a continuation from the zika. Or Dilma, no, There is a connection through the Torah Zika. There's another connection through a rabbinic mimer. And being that the one is independent from the other, you could give a get and say you want the get only to work one without the other, and that statement will be valid, and you have to work out what the consequence will be. So the Gemara says, why are you asking that question when we had such a case before together? Why don't you learn from Rava that Rava says that such a statement is valid? What was the case of Rava? The case of Rava was like this. There were 3 brothers, and each brother married an unrelated wife. So you had Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Reuven died. When Reuven died, both of the brothers have a mitzvah to marry this widow. Shimon gave her mimer. What is mimer? By Torah, nothing. Or at least, let's take out Beis Shammai. Without Beis Shammai, the question is now, is it a suffix marriage? Is it a partial, for sure marriage, but a rabbinic marriage? Now Shimon dies. What's the issue? So we learned in our Mishnah, we learned this together, that Levi cannot do Yibum with neither of Shimon's wives. Why? Because the one that used to be Reuven's wife is called a double widow. She was the widow of Reuven. Rabbinically, she's the widow of Shimon. And we learned from a pasuk, and really it's an asmachta, that a double widow does not fall to Yibum. Whenever a woman does not fall to Yibum, so then the original Isur of you can't marry your brother's wife goes into effect. So she's Asr, and her co-wife is Asr. However, Chalitza is needed. So now Rava asked the question, what's going to happen if Reuven dies? Shimon does mimer to his widow, and then Shimon gives her a get, and he says, I want this get only to sever the mimer that I gave. Rava says those words work. Well, we'll see, we learned there, it doesn't really work fully, there's other rabbinic problems, but it works to the point that whatever Shimon did is undone. So now the original Zika goes back. She's only considered Reuven's widow. So even though even Rava will agree that Levi cannot marry her because of fears that if he can marry this one, he might marry her without the get, but the co-wife can be married with. In other words, Rava specifically said that a man can give a get and say, I want this get only to sever the mimer. That Nasan get l'mamaroi, at least with the Levi can do Yibum with the co-wife.
With Shimon's widow.
With Shimon's original wife, correct? So the Gemara says, well, yeah, Rava pshitale, so what? So Rava knew that you could give a get only for mimer, and the Gemara now is saying also only for Zika, but Rab Chanani mibayil. And the Gemara says, Teku. This question stays standing. Weiter. So now the Mishnah says that if first he did Chalitza, and after he did Chalitza, let's give a case, he does Chalitza, and after Chalitza, let's say he gives her mimer, or after Chalitza he has Biyah. So the Mishnah taught that after Chalitza is done, Chalitza fully severs the connection that God gave between the living brother and the widow, and anything that happens afterwards is of no consequence. Now, of course, if you did Biyah, it's a prohibited Biyah. By a lav, you're not allowed you're not allowed to have a relation with her. But that, you don't need to give a get, let's say if he did Biyah with her. That's what we learned in the Mishnah. So Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, says Rabbi Amar Rav, 1 second, if he did Chalitza, and then he did an act, l'shem marriage, and the Mishnah says that act is of no consequence, and we spoke this out when we learned the Mishnah on Daf Nun, this is only the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. Why is that? The prohibition that this Yavam, or this ex-Yavam has with her is only a lav now. When a person is married, I cannot marry my brother's wife, not only because if I do so I'm violating a lav, it's a lav that has the penalty of kares. But whenever a woman falls for Yibum, if the brother chooses Chalitza, and the Torah says, since you didn't build up your brother's house, you can never build up your brother's house, it's a lav without kares. According to all of the opinions aside of Rabbi Akiva, if a man violates such a lav, he's violating God's will, but if he gives such a woman Kedushin, the Kedushin goes into effect. Like for example, if a Kohen gives Kedushin to a divorcee, they're married. He has to give her a get, but a get is needed. It's only Rabbi Akiva who holds that whenever Hashem says don't have a relation, even if there's no penalty of kares, that in itself does not allow the Kedushin to go into effect. Which is why our Mishnah can say that if he gave Chalitza, and then he did Biyah with her, the Biyah is of no consequence. That's only the words of Rabbi Akiva. But the Chachamim will hold, Yesh achar Chalitza klum. What you do after Chalitza could have significance. Like if you marry her, there is a consequence. The marriage is chal, with many other consequences. Now a get has to be given, because God says they shouldn't be married. But our Mishnah only goes according to Rabbi Akiva. Asks the Gemara, me, matzos maikas like Rabbi Akiva. How can you say that our Mishnah goes according to the opinion of Rabbi Akiva? Vaktani Reisha, it says in the beginning of the Mishnah that Nasan get, but if he gives one wife a get, v'asam maimer, then he gives a maimer to another widow, right? So, according to the Chachamim, and even according to Rab Gamliel, the woman to whom he gave maimer, he cannot be with her. Why can he not be with her? Because since he gave a get to the first, so kivin sholei bana sholei yivna, you cannot marry any of the widows. But he has to give her a get, and chalitza is needed. So ask the Gemara, if our Mishnah is the author of Rabbi Akiva, since he gave a get to the first wife, now that you're not allowed to marry the other Yevama by the penalty of a lav, mi mahanim b'maimer, will maimer work? V'atayim we learned, Rabbi Akiva says, minayin lo get liyavimtoi, that once a man gives a get to his Yevama, he's never allowed to be with her. And Rabbi Akiva quoted the pasuk, so l'chayr it's a doiraisa. P'shenema, because it says lo yuchal balo harishan asher shilcha, that the first husband who sent her away can never marry her again. And we're saying, as adrush, Rabbi Akiva says, acher shiluch, that no matter how he sent her away, no matter, includes the case where a yavam gives the yavam a get, you cannot stay married to her. So seemingly there's a pasuk that prohibits his maimer to her or to another co-wife. And according to Rabbi Akiva, the second maimer should be of no consequence. So Rav Ashi says no, that get yavamin is only midrabanan, like we keep on saying. That was midoiraisa, yibum or chalitza. Nothing else will do anything. Giving a get to your Yevama only has validity midrabanan. He brought a pasuk, so the Gemara says many times, Vikra smachta ba'alma. The pasuk is only what we call an asmachta. After the rabbis made such a law, they found as a pasuk to help us remember the law, to lean on that pasuk, but it's not a din doiraisa. It's only a midrabanan, and Rabbi Akiva holds that whenever something is only asr midrabanan, kedushin is chal. Tanya Nami Hachi, we learned clearly so in a brayso that Omar Rebbe. Now we're going to learn a third opinion. Ein hadvarim halalu amurim, that the words of our Mishnah, that ein achar chalitza klum, was only said elul divrei Rabbi Akiva. Because shahaya oisa chalutza ke'erva. According to Rabbi Akiva, once chalitza is done, and there is an isur lav, kivin sholei bana sholei yivna, that lav is as severe like any other isur erva. Avol chachamim oimrim, but according to the sages, yesh achar chalitza klum. Because kedushin could be chal. And now comes along Rebbe, va'ani oimer, a little bit of an unusual expression. The Rebbe says, and I say, Mosai, that the second act of Maimer works, bizman shekitchel l'shem ishus. It's only if he gave a get, let's say, and then he gave her Kiddushin. He shouldn't have, but he gave her, the Kiddushin is chal. But what happens if he gives her a get, and then he has a relation with her, and he's saying, I'm having a relation with you, not because now I chose to marry you. I'm doing this relation l'shem mitzvahs yibum. Now, there's no mitzvahs yibum here. Once you gave a woman chalitza, there's no more mitzvah. So what you're doing is a mistake. It's like a toast. Avol kitchel l'shem Yevamos, even the Chachamim, where Rebbe is saying, Rebbe will hold ein achar chalitza klum. Because of a maisa that's called a mekach tos, or a maisa that you did betos, which is a whole interesting sugya. In most times you have in Shas that when a person does something and the premise is a wrong premise, what they did is you're going to buy apples and you think you're buying apples and you bought oranges, so the kinyan is not a kinyan because you got the wrong thing. Parenthetically, that's the whole question when you have the story of the brachas that Yitzchak gave to Yaakov. Who did he think he's blessing? He thought he's blessing Esav. And why didn't you say over here that it's a bracha b'taos? Which is an interesting question. There's many different answers. The Avnei Nezer speaks about this, and he says that when it comes to brachas, you don't give the bracha, Hashem gives the bracha. It's not something that you're doing. It's something that's being channeled through you. Other people give another approach. They say that Yitzchak wanted to give it to Esav, but why did he want to give it to Esav? Because he made a mistake. He thought that Esav should be getting it. Had Yitzchak known that Yaakov needed the brachas, he would have wanted to give it to Yaakov. This is a very interesting halachic question. I heard a class from Rabbi Usher Weiss on this. You know, if a person is buying a car, and they tell the owner what they want. They want a car that has 10,000 miles and not more, and they give certain specifications. And the guy looks in his lot and he says, I have a Fiat. and he ended up giving you a Volvo. In Israel, the Volvo is the fancy car. But it turned out that the Volvo fit into your classifications. It's what you told the guy you wanted, you got. But you thought you're signing one car and you got another car. Is that the nullified mekach or not? That's comparable to here. I mean, it's coming back over here. So Rebbe says whenever there was a toast, then it's not chal. And more details into this. Tanya idach, we learned in another brayso, that if a person does chalitza first, and then he gives her kedushin. So again, Rabbi Kiva Chachamim, and Rebbe says, im kitchel l'shem issues, then tzricha imenu get. But if he gave it to her l'shum yevamos, I'm doing the mitzvah of yibum, ain't tzricha imenu get. And the Chachamim say, bein shekitchel l'shem issues. No matter what he said, bein shekitchel l'shem yevamos, being that we don't paskan like Rabbi Kiva. In other words, even though there's a law of kedushin could be chal, and he didn't ma'isa kedushin, tzricha imenu get. Amar Rabbi Yosef says, Rabbi Yosef, my Talmud the Rebbe, what's the logic of Rebbe? That Asuha, Rebbe considered this, he compared this to Ka'oider b'nichsei hager. If the example here is a convert who dies without having children after he or she converted, they don't have halachic heirs, and all of their belongings are considered ownerless, and the first person that does an act of kinyan in it, to be kind of it, will acquire it. So a person goes into such a field that a convert left, but when he walked into that field, he thought it was already his. And he was working in the field. The example is he's hoeing the field. Hoeing is one of the activities that could be done as an act of a kinyan. But he didn't have in mind l'shem kinyan because he thought it's already his. The loikane, that he will not acquire it. Likewise, over here, since he gave her kedushin l'shem issues, Rebbe says she will not be engaged. Amalei Abayas, so Abayas says to Rabbi Yosef, that's a logic. Umi dami, you're giving it the wrong comparison. Hasam over there, loy kamachaven lemikne. When a person thought that that field is already his, so when he was hoeing the field, he wasn't doing it to be kainet. He thought it's his. He's just working his land. But over here, he did do an act l'shem marriage, but he used the word rooting. Instead of the Yevamos, it should have been Kedushin. So what? But kamachaven lemiknei. And what should it be compared to? Holei damya elo, lo'oider benichse ger zeh, uchesaver shel ger acherhu, that the kanei, according to Rebbe, if there were two converts that died, and each one left the field, and I went into one, and I thought that I'm acquiring it from Avraham the ger, and really it belonged to Yitzchak the ger. There, Rebbe will hold that he will acquire it because you didn't ma'isa kinyan. So why would Rebbe hold it's called a ta'os when the act he did was l'shem kedushin, and whether it was l'shem a normal kedushin or l'shem a yibum kedushin, that should not make a difference. El Amar Abai explains Rebbe going to Amar Lo, he tells her clearly his katshili b'maimer yavamin, that being that he says, and the way Rashi talks out, I'm not giving this to you as kedushin. I'm giving this to you, I regret that I gave you chalitza. No, there's a mitzvah, I don't want to lose the mitzvah. I'm giving this to you dafke l'shem mitzvah yibum, and not kedushin, that's why it's not going to work. Rebbe Savar Maimer Ilove Zika Korami, that originally when the brother died, and there was a mitzvah to do Maimer, and Maimer would have worked, that kedushin would have worked because there was a Zika, then you should do it that way. But now you gave chalitza, and since you gave chalitza is afkesol zika, the chalitza took off the zika. There's no more connection, and since there's no more connection, so therefore now that you're doing an act, even though the act looks like mimer, it's no longer mimer. So l'chayda Rebbe is right. Why would it be valid? So the Gemara says Gavaldik that according to the Chachamim, when in a normal case of a yavam and a yavama, now that the rabbi said do mimer. Maimer is not considered, there's no connection between Maimer and Zika. There is a Zika connection. And the rabbi says that even though you have a mitzvah to do Yibum, before you do Yibum, do an act of Kedushin. So now that the rabbis instituted an act of Kedushin, independent of Zika, so just like he was allowed to do Kedushin before, even though now he's not allowed to do it, but he's saying that he's doing it, it should at least go into effect. Now, if you hold like Rabbi Akiva, since you're not allowed to do it, it won't go into effect because there's a chiyuv lav. But even though he's saying it should not be an act of kedushin, how is this mimer different than the mimer that one should do before chalitza? There's no difference according to the Chachamim. What's mimer is an act in itself.
It's a three-way machlokes, right?
You will get to.
Rebbe and Chacham. He was saying it would never be chal. Rebbe says it depends.
Correct.
On how you do it, and the Chacham
Say it's always chal. That's right. Correct. Meikara, just like originally, ilu amarli skachali b'maymer yevamin, miloik mahani, hashtanami, at least midirabanan, it should work. That's one approach. Rabbi gives another approach. We're trying to explain the machlekes between Rebbe and the Chachamim. Ida amar la b'maymer yevamin, kul amarli pligi de mahanyo. Now we're adding that really Rebbe holds that Maimer doesn't continue the Zika. Maimer is like a separate act of Kedushin. And therefore Rebbe will hold that even if he used the words of Yibum, not Kedushin, it will work. You shouldn't have done it, but it will work. Midrabanan. I mean, it will work and you have to give a get. Going to Amarlo is Kachili bezikas Yevamim. He's saying, I want you to get engaged because of the Zika that exists between us. And now, Rebbe Savar Yesh Zika. Rebbe holds that normally there is a Zika. And Va'asi Chalitza, and Apiksei Lezika. Chalitza cuts off the Zika. There is no more Zika, which is why it will not go into effect. The Rabbanan here hold that there was never Zika. And even though, and if there's never Zika, so if a man, forget about the case of Chalitza. A Yavam tells the Yavama, I want us to get, I'm giving you a mimer because of the Zika. It goes into effect. There is no halachic zika. We don't care. He didn't mean halachic zika. He meant the mimer should do something like the zika does, just like I'm mechoyev to marry you. This mimer will make our connection even stronger. This is what he meant. He wasn't going into the halachic ramification of it. That ain't zika meikara. And therefore, even in ilo armaleis kacheli bezikas yivama miloi mahani hashtanami mahani. Another approach. Rab Shravya says like this: b'chalitza kshera. The Amar law is kachili bezikas yuvamin, that if he gives her a real chalitza and he says the words, I want us to get engaged because of the zika that we have, then everyone will agree it does not work because there is no zika after chalitza. But where does Rebbe and the Chachamim argue? Here we're speaking about a case where the chalitza is called a disqualified chalitza. This is what we're learning from the beginning of this Perek. A disqualified chalitza means that whenever Yibum is not a option, and we learned so many cases together where Midoiraisa Yibum should be done, but Midrabanan, for whatever reason, Yibum should not be done. So chalitza is needed. And we learned many Amoraim held that when you give chalitza in a case where you could not have given Yibum, the chalitza does not fully sever the connection. So for example, if there's two brothers, one brother does chalitza, normally one chalitza is good. Whenever the chalitza that one brother did was called a disqualified chalitza because that brother, for whatever reason, was unable to do Yibum with her, then maybe that chalitza is not enough, she also needs to get chalitza from the other brother. So they're speaking about a case where after a chalitza psula, he went ahead and he gave her Kedushin money, and he says, this is to finalize the Zika that we have. And there is some Zika left, because she needs Chalitza from the other brother. Marsov and Rebbe holds that Chalitza Psula Poiteres, that Chalitza Psula, even though it's disqualified, fully severs the Zika. And now that there is no Zika, so if he's saying, I want to finalize or build on the Zika, it's a mistake. There is no zika. There's nothing to be built upon. But Umar Savar, the Chachamim hold chalitza psula einoi poiteres, and therefore the Chachamim hold that the marriage does go into effect. We'll stop over here. Eretz Hashem will continue tomorrow. I think there's one or two more answers explaining the machlekes between. There's two more answers between Rebbe and the Chachamim.